Good evening. I'm calling to order the regular meeting of the Euclid Board of Education. Today is Monday, May 14th, and we are meeting at the Fordyce building. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Go ahead. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Here.
Mrs. Lizey.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mrs. Sudar.
Here.
Mrs. Van Hoen.
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt the minutes of April 9th, 16th, and 23rd.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. DeAngelis. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Hoen.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lizey.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And it's not even a full moon tonight. Do we have any additions, revisions, or deletions?
Yes, we have one deletion, and it will be item number 22, the amendment to the lease with Euclid Square Mall. It will be brought back to the board.
Okay. Thank you. And at this point, Mr. Smith, do you have a legislative liaison report?
Yes, very briefly, President Van Hoen, members of the board, members of the community. The Horseshoe Casino opens tonight in downtown Cleveland. I suspect that other casinos open across the rest of the state sometime relatively soon. I have no idea, to be honest with you. But because of that, there have been some estimates thrown around about casino revenue for schools. And I would advise the community that these are very preliminary figures, but the current estimates are it'll generate approximately $40 per student for the fiscal year 2012-2013, 80 years per student fiscal year 13-14, which translates to, for the Euclid City Schools, approximately $225,000 in fiscal year 13 and $450,000 in fiscal year 14. Before you all go out and begin spending that money, I would remind you that the annual budget for the Euclid City Schools is approximately $70 million. So is an additional $225,000 helpful? Of course it is. However, until the state figures out a way to actually solve the school funding crisis that has been declared unconstitutional 4 times, we're not going to see any sort of lasting change to how schools are financed here in the state of Ohio. Which leads me to my secondary point, which is the House Finance and Appropriations Committee has continued hearings on school funding. They were going on last week. They will continue in the upcoming weeks. There's no real timetable as to when the House Finance and Appropriations Committee will make any sort of the school funding recommendation, but we are keeping folks apprised as to what's going on down there and how it will affect the Euclid City School District and the Euclid community overall. Just to give you an idea, some of the topics they've explored over the last week, they dealt with an overview of the K-12 funding system using a variety of statistics that included revenue sources, state share, and K-12 education spending. They also engaged in a discussion on the foundation formula theory and methods to determine base cost. And they also took a brief look at the Ohio State Supreme Court's 4 decisions on the DeRolf School funding lawsuit, as well as a discussion on Ohio's recent funding models. So the fun continues in Columbus, and we will, of course, keep you apprised. But we wanted you to know also that some of the money that will be generated starting tonight down in Public Square will come back to the Euclid City School District. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. The saga of school funding goes on. It's been around as long as I've been on the board, and actually we found out it went back to the early 1970s when people complained that the funding system wasn't constitutional, wasn't fair. And we all know about the lottery, because that was supposed to give us lots of money, and that didn't happen either. So we'll see. At this point, Mrs. Lysy, do you have a student liaison report?
Yes, I do, President Van Ho, and actually it's an explanation of some of the artwork that you see displayed here in our boardroom. The artwork is from our visual communication class at Euclid High School, and currently they're wrapping up their third year on the direction of Edie Mellon. And this program is providing students with various opportunities to demonstrate their creativity. Most recently, 3 teachers in the art department, Edie Mellon, Mary Mycelli, and Meg Garbinkis, I hope I pronounced that correctly, learned about the Memory Project and decided to have visual communication students participate in this program. Now, the Memory Project has students pay a small fee to create portraits of children from orphanages around the world. To fund the cost of this project, Mrs. Mellon had her 24 students work in groups to raise $75 per team to purchase the portraits. Over the past 2 weeks, these students have created the portraits on display, as you see here this evening. And in June, a representative from the Memory Project will deliver Euclid's portraits to an orphanage in Honduras. Now this project, well, you know what, before I finish that, do we have a video that we can play now?
This was in the OEA magazine, and it was in the back, and they were asking for high school students to do portraits for this project called the Memory Project. I connected it with my business unit, and I put them in teams. They had to raise their own money because the portraits actually cost $15 each.
Well, we raised money together in groups for to paint orphans in Honduras.
We came up with the idea to sell cookies at our school's musical.
So I thought this would be a project that they can both get community service hours, plus it would be kind of neat for them to do something for someone that is underprivileged.
It's not just for critics' sake or anything like that. I feel like this project is really supposed to do something.
Somebody will appreciate what I'm doing, rather than it just going in my drawer or in my portfolio.
We're spending a lot more time on them.
We had to paint something for them. It was more for someone and not for ourselves. I think that kind of helps push along my work and like what I've done for the class.
Kind of made you like think about them, and like if like just a simple portrait means that much to them, I wish I could just like send them a bike, you know.
Actually, my juniors have never painted a portrait before, so this is the first portrait that they've painted.
It was definitely challenging because we haven't really had to paint portraits yet.
With this, I had to work harder, and I work hard on my other art project. Like, I really want him to like it. In his picture, he looks very, friendly and, just a kid that's having fun. So I kind of wanted to, embrace that in the picture.
Kids in Honduras are going to be able to write back to our students after they receive their portraits. So it's going to be interesting to see what they have to say about how my students painted them.
It was just kind of special, like to give back something, like you make something and you can give it back to somebody.
They're really adorable, and I think it's going to inspire them to do, maybe the same thing.
It's kind of giving something back to children who have nothing. It even motivates me to want to try to do more and to do better on this project.
Well, I'm hoping it means that they know people out there care, even if we don't know each other.
This project not only demonstrates the creativity that our students possess at Euclid High School, but it also exemplifies their compassion and their caring for others. And just a sidebar, we have had several students go on to art school and do extremely well and come back and report to us that they are so prepared when they get on into their colleges and universities and art schools. Our neighbor, Julie DiDomenico, graduated several years ago. She finished up in Columbia Art School in Chicago. She just had her first gallery opening, sold her first piece of artwork for $800. Isn't that wonderful? So they can't, and I know you being the son of an artist.
Son of an artist.
Our students graduate from Euclid and are so well prepared, and we actually have some that are making a living at it now. So congratulations to them.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, at this time, are there any visitor comments relative to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on then to recognition, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mrs. Van Ho. Every year, we are very proud to present the American Legion Buckeye Boys and Girls State delegates, and we have come to that time again this year. And I would like to recognize them by first reading the resolution into the minutes. Be it resolved that whereas the American Legion Buckeye Boys and Girls State will be held this summer at Bowling Green State University for boys and the University of Mount Union for girls, and whereas these students are sponsored by the Euclid American Legion Post number 343 and the American Legion Auxiliary, and whereas students who participate learn about city, county, and state government through hands-on operation of a democratic form of government and the organization of political parties. Now therefore be resolved that the Euclid Board of Education extends congratulations to the following 11th grade students who have been selected to represent Euclid High School at this year's Buckeye Boys and Girls State. For the boys, James Cerny, Oliver Gates, and Jabril Rogers. For the girls, Brianna Cunningham, Rachel Essel, Hannah Mobaseri, and Amina Sakalik. So, I could call them up.
Call the roll, please.
We need a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. We need a motion. Sorry.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Smith, seconded by Mrs. Sudar. Now call the roll.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Board. James Cerny.
He regrets he cannot be here. I'm his father. He has to work tonight. So.
Well, all right. You can come and take his certificate tonight. You look like you have a very great son. Congratulations. Jabril Rogers. Here this evening. Oliver Gates. Congratulations, Oliver. Applause is appropriate. Amina Sakalik. Brianna Cunningham. Rachel Essel.
She had to work.
She had to work another worker. And Hannah Mobaseri.
Oh, I know, she had a lifeguarding class.
Ladies and gentlemen, our boys and girls state winners for our representatives from Euclid High School. So congratulations. If the parents are in the audience, would you stand to be recognized this evening?
Can I just, 2 out of my 3 kids got a chance to go, one to boys state, one to girls state, and had phenomenal experiences. But I'm still waiting for the first Euclid governor. So go out there and get ready ahead of time and meet a lot of people and shake a lot of hands. But even no matter what position you end up with, I'm sure that you'll enjoy your experience, you're going to learn a lot, and maybe meet some public officials that might inspire you to go on to public service. So,
Maybe even meet some lifelong friends, too. So.
Absolutely.
So congratulations, everybody. Pardon?
You have another one, right?
Another presentation, yes.
Recognition.
Another recognition.
Go ahead, I'd like to do it from there.
So I want to read the resolution again. Our second recognition this night is for the Euclid High School debate team champions, and I am recommending them this resolution for approval.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. DeAngelis. Was that, oh, Ms. Sudar, I'm sorry. Second?
Second.
By Mrs. DeAngelis.
Thank you. Again, if I may, I was a little premature before reading the resolution before this motion in the second. Be it resolved that whereas the Euclid High School debate team won their second consecutive Cleveland Urban Debate League championship held April 28, 2012, and whereas the league consists of teams from Brush, Shaw, St. Martin de Porres, Cleveland JFK, Cleveland Success Tech, and Cleveland STEM. And whereas Euclid teams compiled a 7-3 overall record in the double elimination tournament, and whereas the team of Hannibal Basseri and Samantha Lisey took 4th place, and whereas in the championship match it was Euclid versus Euclid with the team of A.J. Stovall and Taylor Sowell winning a commanding 7-0 unanimous decision, becoming the 2012 Cleveland Urban Debate League champions, with the team of Quentin Sims and Amanda Wagner named runners-up. And whereas Quentin Sims was named the top debater in the league for the 2nd consecutive year. Now therefore be resolved that the Euclid Board of Education extends congratulations to these students and their coach, Matt Allison, for their achievements, which has brought honor to them and to our school district.
You call the roll, please.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lisey.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Board. We're going to introduce these students, but we're not going to argue with them. A.J. Stovall. Taylor Sowell. Taylor's not here this evening. Hannibal Basseri. Samantha Lisey. Quentin Sims. And Amanda Wagner. Okay, great. Yes. Before we ask the students to leave, and for one final applause, I'd like Mr. Allison to come up and say a few words about the competition, about the students, and he should be able to think on his feet, don't you think? So, you did a great job last year. I'm sure you're going to duplicate again.
Well, I didn't, it's all about preparation. I don't really have anything prepared, but, I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with a lot of young people in the 14 years I've been an educator. I used to coach football and baseball both on the college and high school level, and of course 2 years with the debate team. And I can honestly say without question that I am more proud of this group of young people than any group that I've ever been associated with. And not necessarily because of our success. Sometimes success can be deceiving. I could probably go out and play a basketball game against a bunch of second graders and do really well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, I'm a great basketball player. I think the measure of a true champion is overcoming adversity. And in the 2 years that we've been together and the Cleveland Urban Debate League has been an organization, we've had a lot of success. But if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not sure how much adversity we've overcome. We kind of hit the ground running, last year and never looked back. Well, that all kind of changed on March 17th of this year. We went to John Carroll University for a tournament, and for the first time ever, we came home with a losing record. We had 2 schools finish ahead of us, Brush and JFK, and we won 6 out of a possible 16 rounds. And so we kind of regrouped and changed our focus a little bit and said, there's some things we need to do better, and we'll get it all fixed by the next one. Everybody's entitled to a bad day, that kind of thing. And April 21st, we went back to John Carroll, guns a-blazing, and we won 2 out of 12 rounds that day. And it put us in kind of a unique position because 7 days later, we were going back to a double elimination tournament. And I've never seen, a group of young people pull together like we did as a team this year. When you face that kind of adversity, it can really, anybody who's been involved in that kind of organization knows what I'm talking about. But it can either tear you apart or it can bring you together. And I'm proud to say that this group of young people came together like I've never seen a group come together before, under the leadership of our captain, AJ, who gave me one of the most fulfilling experiences because, you know, a lot of times I would kind of hand them material and say, you know, kind of take a leadership role and say, you know, this is the way we're gonna argue this particular point. This is the piece of evidence we're going to use, and they've done an outstanding job of you know, executing the plan. And for the first time ever, you know, on that, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday of that week, AJ kind of came in with a stack of stuff and said, you know, Coach, this is what we're going to do. And I said, okay, you know, and I was like, well, this is better than anything I came up with. And then, you know, we were fortunate to have an opportunity, thanks to Dr. Smilik, to get together for about 5 hours on Friday, the day before the tournament, and I just kind of sat back and watched, and it was a thing of beauty. So I'm proud to work with these young people, and thank you for that experience. Don't embarrass me.
It's from all of us. It's to say thank you for everything you've done and just for being a great coach.
Thank you. Did I get anything from you guys?
Thank you.
And a pat on the back.
Thank you, sir.
And the parents, if you're here, would you stand to be recognized?
Okay, at this time, we'll move on to reports and recommendations of the treasurer. Mr. Vasek.
Thank you, Mrs. Van Ho. Item number 10 is a resolution approving financial data submitted to the board. I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. DeAngelis. Are there any questions or comments?
May I make a comment?
You sure may.
The board will notice that this month we do not have a list of bills. We are currently in a learning curve. We just went through our first month then with basically a totally new staff after all retirements. So we're chugging along. We're just a few days behind on a few things, but we are going through a learning curve, and you will get these next month.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Item number 11 is a resolution approving amendments of appropriations, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. Lysy. Any questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Item 12 is a resolution approving appropriation adjustment authority. I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. DeAngelis. Are there any questions or comments?
Quick comment. This is an action I ask of the board. May of every year. It assists in the close-up process to the fiscal year.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Item 13 is a resolution adopting the revised 5-year forecast. I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mr. Smith.
Can I make a comment or two?
You sure may. I think you're going to have a presentation.
Do we want to? Yeah.
Yeah, if any of the families need to leave so students can get home and do homework, they can leave now.
Okay, the board will remember in last October when we presented the 5-year forecast for the current fiscal year. Basically, we were coming up to the operating levy, and at that point, it was decided that if the operating levy failed, in addition to the cuts that we made, we would need an additional $1.5 million in cuts to get us through the fiscal 13 year. I'm sure this is no surprise to the board, from some of the things I've been reporting, things have deteriorated further, I'm afraid to say, in terms of property tax collections. After a pretty decent year last year, the delinquency spiked again in this last fiscal year, and reduction in state revenues through another pretty significant increase in charter school deduction. And I'll get to those in a minute. What that's going to do to us is, although we've made all the cuts, again, 12% of the staff up through this last year. This next year, some due to cuts, but mostly due to the elementary reorganization, we are reducing staff, total certified and non-certified, by, I believe, 31 full-time equivalencies. We've enacted, as part of the $1.5 million cuts, the minimum state transportation, delaying textbook purchases, and we've taken back in-house some contracted transportation that we had for special needs children, and we reduced our long-term substitute teacher rate. A couple of those things went into effect in January. Between those actions and continuing them through the next year, that gives us our $1.5 million. However, it's not enough, and you'll see that based on this forecast and the assumptions made, that we will need to dip in the reserves to get through the next fiscal year. Property values. Reported to the board that this being a reappraisal year, I received preliminary figures for residential properties, and they're reporting a 9% reduction at this point. We do not have any information on commercial properties yet, but a 9% reduction would take us down to $672 million. And you'll see, as 6 years ago, we were at $823 million. Of course, our personal tangible taxes no longer exist. We lost $81 million of value there. And you'll see the value, the change in value of one mill collection on these values, from over $900,000 in 2006 to $672,000 for a mill collected in the 2012 tax year.
You want to explain real quick what a mill does and how we use that when we go for levies and so forth?
A mill is a tax of $1 for each $1,000 of assessed valuation of a property. Now, the assessed valuation is 35% of the auditor's estimated fair market value. So for a house with a market value of $100,000, the assessed value is $35,000, and 1 mil being $1 for every 1,000, 1 mil would cost that homeowner of that $100,000 house $35 a year.
Thank you.
I mentioned delinquency spiked again. The latest figure I received was at the end of 2011, $10.4 million, up from as recent as 2007 of $2.5 million. Approximately 2/3 of that is due to the school districts, or is owed to the school districts. Theoretically, someday we'll get that money whenever the property owner comes current, or when the property sells, but as of now, there's about $7 million owed to us through delinquencies. That did cause the settlements, both the first half, or the second half of 2011 and the first half of 2012, which is this fiscal year, to drop pretty significantly. The second half, 2011, dropped by about $2 million from the second half collection in 2010. And the first half in 2012 dropped about $3 million. I'll make another comment on real estate in a minute, but there was, we did get some advanced money in the last fiscal year. I'll talk about it now. The county issued notes last spring against future collection of delinquencies, took the proceeds and distributed them to the taxing units. So we got kind of an advance of delinquent collections. And that's one reason our real estate collections were a little higher last year. We come to the fall of 2011, those notes had to be repaid, so the money was deducted from our settlements at that point. So we didn't come out ahead. We got the money a little earlier than we normally would have, but and you'll see on the actual forecast a pretty good drop from the fiscal 11 collections to the fiscal 12 collections. I think it's about $2 million or so. School choice, those numbers, I've had this chart up previously. This adds the fiscal 12 numbers. As of last fall, the state was running behind in their through their EMIS programs and getting information out to us. But in the end, community schools increased their deductions by over $1 million to us. Interestingly enough, choice vouchers actually declined a little bit, but overall, we're at about $8.4 million right now. And that effectively reduces our state foundation because that's where the money comes from.
Also, would you comment on the fact that the state takes out more than what?
Yes, there's in charter schools, the state deducts the stated per pupil amount, and with Ed Choice vouchers, it's a flat amount. I believe it's $5,200 for high school students and $4,900 for elementary students. In the formula, kind of at the top of the calculation, there's a calculation that says, okay, Euclid, you have X amount of students, and our state foundation is, say, $5,000. Here's the gross amount. But there is an assumed level of local collections based on 23 mills. That gets deducted from that amount. So that amount turns out to be about $19 million. So $19 million is deducted from that big calculation up front. And we end up getting something less on a per pupil basis than what is stated. However, when the deductions are made, the full amount gets deducted.
And that's how local money is going to charter schools and Ed Choice schools, so to charters and parochial schools. And that's local taxpayer dollars that were voted for Euclid schools.
Yes, and if you look at that $8 million, that's over 10 mills right now.
Mm-hmm. We wouldn't have to go for a levy.
Yeah. Without a doubt. This is a little bit of a review. In the previous biennial budget, that's when the economy went in the tank and the state had a budget shortfall. The state filled the shortfall to school districts through federal stabilization monies. So $1.8 million of last year and the previous year, $1.8 million of our state foundation was actually federal money. That has gone. The state has not replaced that. So essentially, there was a $1.8 million cut in our state foundation monies with, I guess, a 2-year extension from due to the federal budget stabilization monies. Again, those are gone. Another of the Stimulus Act money was the teacher's job bill, $1.2 million over 2 years. This is the second year of that money. We spent about $500,000 of that last year, about $700,000 of it this year. After this year, that money's gone. The personal tangible phase out, 10 years ago we were collecting about $6 million a year in personal tangible money. That is gone. The state instituted a kind of a phased out reimbursement for a number of years. I believe it was supposed to be phased out over 13 years. In the last biennium budget, House Bill 183, that was accelerated. So last year it was reduced by $1.5 million. This year it's $1.5 million, and there's about $900,000 left per year. I have that included in, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. Hopefully that amount, that $900,000 out of our original $6 million will remain. That's good news if it happens. We've taken a lot of actions to address the drastic reduction in revenues. As you'll see in a little bit, even though we've made a lot of cuts and reductions, we just haven't been able to keep pace with the reduction in revenues. I mentioned before, previous 3 years we cut 12% of our staff. This year we're cutting back 11.6 certified, 19.5. I'm sorry, that's for next year, for the fiscal 13 year. Most of that is due to the elementary school restructuring, but there are some cuts in there. As we all know, all the employees stepped up to the plate and gave back 3% of wages in terms of wages and benefits this last year. Everybody's on a step freeze, and that's in place through next year. The additional cuts again, minimum state transportation standards were put into place. We brought back in-house, and we bought a couple of vans, and we're saving a pretty decent amount of money there. Textbooks, they were slated at $430,000 next year. Those have been taken out, reduced the long-term sub rates, saving us about $120,000 a year, it's estimated, and a provision to increase our pay to participate fees. The elementary restructuring, I don't know if it's being good or being lucky, but years ago when we came up with this plan for the 4 elementary schools, we estimated $1 million in operational savings. We actually were able to put pencil to paper this year, and that number came out to $1,049,000. So I'll say we're good versus lucky.
Good. Being close.
We also negotiated a retirement incentive with the teachers bargaining group. A number of teachers did take advantage of it, and we're expected to save about $300,000 next year and in subsequent years. Talk about some of the assumptions in the forecast. The collection rate, that's the collection rate that the county has estimated for the 2011 collection year. That's current collections only. Again, we do collect some delinquencies, and that pushes that up, I think, probably over 95%. I've been told that the county is going to adjust that to 90% in the next year. Again, that's just the estimate from the county standpoint. Again, the reappraisal of 9%. The majority of our millage is affected by House Bill 920. This is an occasion where House Bill 920 does help us out. Traditionally, we've always thought about House Bill 920 reducing the millage with increasing property values. Property values have been decreasing, so the effective rate has increased for the most part. We do have inside millage that is not affected by by House Bill 920. In all, I would expect about a $300,000 reduction just from the reappraisal. The state foundation, Mr. Smith talked about the folks in Columbus starting to talk about the new state funding formula. I've just based this forecast on what's currently in there. So the formula is unknown. I kept it pretty static except for the effect of decreased enrollment or increased school choice by about 120 a year. And that's what we're expecting this coming year. Mr. Smith also talked about casino revenue. The estimates I've heard are very similar to what Mr. Smith heard. What I heard last week was in fiscal 13 about $35 a student. In fiscal 14, $78 a student, and then beyond that, $82 a student. But again, it's not complete speculation, and things can change. We don't know, what constitutes a student and how it's going to be distributed, if it's going to come through the county or from the county to the state to us. But that's our best guess at this point. And it works out, in my calculations, to just under $200,000 in fiscal 13 and close to $450,000 by fiscal 15. And I have that in the other category.
Okay, that is contingent, though, on all the casinos getting built.
Yes.
Which, as I understand, some of them are behind at this point. So there's two that we can count on.
Yeah. I would also mention the racetracks are getting the VLTs, and there's tax money collected, but that money is going straight to the lottery. It's part of the lottery program, so we know what happens with the lottery. So I have no assumption in here. Some assumptions on expenditures. Again, we're reducing staff by 31 FTEs. I do not, in the forecast, I do not have any major changes as far as staffing levels. Wages, I have no base increases, although after the current bargaining agreements, at least for planning purposes in the forecast, I did put back the steps and the unpaid furlough days. And so you see some increases in the wage line item. Again, the retirement incentive, saving about $300,000. Under benefits, I've got medical, and that would include prescription drugs at 12% per year. Workers' comp, we used to charge off 2% of salaries. That was a fairly conservative rate, but we went through several years of pretty high claims, and we had to set those monies aside. Over the years, we've gotten better with our claims, and we've built up a pretty decent reserve. So I think it's prudent and a good decision to pull that back to 1%, where we charge off only 1% versus 2%. That saves us about $400,000 a year. I also have built in for this fiscal year premium holiday. We do have over the years some excess reserves built up in our health reserve and prescription drug reserve fund. And I'll talk a little bit more about those reserves in a little bit, but we do have that built in actually for the month of June to help us come in within budget and forecast. Again, the levy cuts, we talked about those. We did enact a couple of those this last January. Those are built in, and I do not have them coming back, at least in this forecast. Okay, with all that said, we were showing a pretty fairly hefty deficit in the fiscal 13 year, and Dr. Jones and I talked, and we decided we figured this out, of course, after we made plans for the $1.5 million in reductions. We've got reserves that can get us through the next fiscal year, and this is assuming a levy does not pass in 2012. We've had the budget reserve for a lot of years, $1.27 million. In this forecast, those monies are released. And additionally, I have in the operating transfer in line $1.5 million. We can either do a transfer, or we can take a series of more premium holidays, but this, for our purposes, this is just a placeholder right now. This will, if all these assumptions play out, this will get us through the fiscal 13 year. Of course, this is a one-time fix. There's still structurally, we're still spending more than we're receiving, and we've reduced our expenditures, but up until now, we have not been able to keep pace. These are summary numbers of revenues and expenditures. You'll see that we're very thin at the end of the fiscal 13 year. This is unencumbered, unreserved fund balance. We'll have more cash, but we've got encumbrances that are carried over. Fiscal 14 is showing a $6.5 million deficit, fund balance deficit, and that gets bumped up to $15.5 million in fiscal 15. In order to avoid that $15.5 million deficit, it would take a levy in the 9 to 10 mil range passed in November. And a lot of that is, our tax base is 2/3 of what it used to be. And it just takes more millage to bring in the same amount of money, and we need more than the same amount of money versus 10 years ago, because cost of operating continues to increase. And I believe that's all I have as far as a presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions you may have.
Okay. Does anyone on the board have questions? When you were talking about the budget reserves, is that what they had called the rainy day fund?
Yes.
That we had to
Yes.
set aside?
If you recall, we were required to put aside money for several purposes over a number of years. Those requirements went away, but the board decided to leave that money there for a rainy day,
and it's
the
pouring.
clouds are rolling in.
Well, we won't kill the messenger.
Thank you.
Because we know this is out of anyone's hands that's in this room. Until the state figures out what they're going to do, this is our plan, and we'll go forward with it. But it does not eliminate the need for levies until the state totally changes how they fund schools.
Between school choice and the cut in the foundation that was never restored, and the phase out of the personal tangible tax, I believe you're talking close to $12 million that essentially
the state
10
took
years
away.
ago, 12 years ago we had.
That the state took away.
Yep.
That's really what it amounts to.
That would have made the decrease in the tax base a bit more tolerable.
Oh, yeah, it would have made up for it, you know. We could have dealt with it then.
Right.
Yeah, I thank you for clarifying the issue on the fact that money that was passed for the Euclid Public Schools is going to the charter and parochial schools because of the state's programs and charter schools and ed choice.
And going on to the future, we need to pass millage to make up for that money we're losing.
Right. It'd be interesting if they would somehow tie what they get for the charters and the parochial schools to the passage of our levies, but they don't.
No.
But it would be a good idea.
I know that they were thinking about expanding the vouchers at the state level. Mr. Smith, have you heard anything? I know that was sort of on the table. Has it been actually passed? Are they expanding it for the 2013 or 2012, 2013?
It's not going to be for this year because they didn't get their work done on time.
Okay.
Right. They didn't expand it to the degree that they had planned to and wanted
Okay.
to, but they still have boosted from 30,000 to 60,000 the number of vouchers that they wish to have students across the state take advantage of.
Right. I couldn't remember the numbers, but I knew it was almost double.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Bassett. And we need to then, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Van Hoen.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Item 14 is a resolution hiring healthcare process consultants. This is our firm that assists us in processing Medicaid claims. I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. DeAngelis. Any questions or comments? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Hoen.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. And item 15 is a resolution approving tax rates for 2013. I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mr. Smith.
Let me make a comment.
You can make a comment.
Once again, due to the reduction, the anticipated reduction in property values, a couple things have changed. The bond retirement fund is actually moving from 4.18 to 4.38. We're expecting a little bit of a drop there due to debt coming off, but that's not happening. The average homeowner will pay less than they would have, or they paid last year, but that rate is being bumped up. And also the emergency levy from 2008, that was a dollar levy, so the millage rate gets adjusted based on the valuation. In 2008, it was estimated at 6.9 mils. We will be collecting a little over 9 mils now.
For the same reason that you're talking about
for the same dollar
before.
amount, yeah. Actual taxes won't go up for residents, but the millage rate has to be adjusted to keep pace with the reduction of values.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Hoen.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And thank you, too, for all the backup that you gave us to read over the weekend.
Very clear.
Okay.
The last item I had is a resolution to deny ETA grievance
Or to
uphold it.
right. It's one way or the other. And at this point, we have to make a decision. And I need a motion to either deny or uphold the ETEA grievance, which is with the technical employees.
I will make the motion that we deny the grievance.
Okay. And I have Mr. Smith made the motion. Is there a second?
Second it.
Seconded by Mrs. Sudar. Any questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Hoen.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. And that concludes my report and all my good news.
Someday you're
One of
going to
these
come
days.
to us with good news. I hope I'm still around to hear it.
Right.
Okay, at this point, we will move on to reports and recommendations of the superintendent, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mrs. Van Hoen. Items 17 through 21 are personnel-related, and Dr. Silico will represent me in these matters.
Thank you. Item number 17 is resolution considering the certified staff for the 2011-2012 school year, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. Lysy. Any questions or comments?
Just one question. I see that we have Mrs. Chris's resignation. And have we begun the process of finding a new principal for?
Yes, we have.
And how's that going?
Very well, and we're close to finding.
We have interviewed 2 finalists at this point.
Oh, very good.
So we're pleased with both, and we're just waiting to make a decision.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 18 is resolution considering the classified staff for the 2011-2012 school year, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. De Angelis. Any questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 19 is resolution considering the Adult Basic Literacy Education Resource Center staff for the 2011-12 school year, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. Lysy. Any questions or comments? And this is for
This
Gloria.
is the rehire of Gloria Gillette. This particular resolution will rehire her through the balance of this fiscal year, or actually contract year.
Okay, thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item 20 is a resolution considering grant payments, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mr. Smith. Any questions or comments? Okay, this is the actual payment to people through using grant money that we've received.
Yes. That's right.
Thank you. And, oh, I'm sorry, you had one more. Oh, I'm sorry. No, thank you.
We need a roll call. We have a motion.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. And item 21 is a resolution considering the reduction in force for the certified personnel for the 2012-2013 school year, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second. By
Second.
Mr. Smith. Any questions or comments?
Well, as you can see here, these are the names of the employees, the teachers that will be being laid off. Hopefully, we'll get some back as a result of maybe either resignations or more retirements to come. So we anticipate maybe getting some back. That would be very nice.
Right. The board had taken action previously on program additions and deletions. In this case, it's deletions, and this is a sad day for the board and for the certified staff, but it is the cost of doing business here in the district.
It's sad, too, because we have excellent people that we stand to lose to other districts because of this. Okay, any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 23 is a resolution considering the authorization for a lease agreement with PEP, the Positive Education Program, to lease Indian Hills, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes, this is a great opportunity for the schools to take a building which will be vacant and apply it to educational purposes. We have a number of students who are served by the Positive Education Program. Many of them will be attending that school rather than being transported hither and yon. And we will also be agreeing to some professional development opportunities with their staff as well. The agreement is for 10 years, but it can be modified at the end of any year, and with enough notice to the PEP program. We did this back in 2004 when we brought the building back in the inventory when we reopened Indian Hills and Memorial, because we had PEP there at that time. So we're recommending approval this evening of this opportunity for the Euclid City Schools.
I do know that people in the neighborhood have been wondering, and I couldn't reveal what was going on, but they were happy that it was something educationally related, so I'm sure they're going to be happy to hear that it's the same program that they're used to having there. And hopefully that'll save us some money in transportation of special ed students as well. Okay, any other questions or comments?
What is the financial commitment on PEP's?
$1
$1
per year. But they are in charge of all upkeep and improvements. We have the approval rights for any of those modifications or improvements that they need to make.
And they're also using their own employees
Yes, they're using their own employees for
custodial
custodial
purposes,
services.
so that's something that's different this time. And I know that we have some protections for our facility as well built into the contract.
Right.
I talked to Mr. Higley about that to make sure that, you know, that should there be any damage or the fact that we can go in and look and see what they're doing.
Dr. Jones, is there other educational possibilities for some of the other buildings in our district?
At this point, we have not explored further with other agencies.
And we've done this in the past with PEP, and it's been successful.
Yes.
So
Right.
there could be some potential there.
There could be. We tried unsuccessfully to use Lincoln Elementary School for the closing of a Green Road facility, but they couldn't come to it. We couldn't agree on terms. So we have, been exploring, but at this point, this is what we have. We will dedicate Lincoln Elementary to housing of the trades, for example, and storage at Ben Franklin once Ben Franklin has been cleared.
Okay. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 24 is a resolution considering the authorization of a lease agreement with the Shore Cultural Center for the Culinary Arts Program, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second?
By Mrs. Lysy.
It seems like it was only yesterday that
Yeah.
we made this arrangement 5 years ago, but we have come to the end of that program, and we are reauthorizing, I'm asking the board to reauthorize the agreement for 5 additional years. The amount for the lease has gone up from $7,000 a year to $10,000 a year, which is still a great, it's very inexpensive for what we have there. In addition to the increase this year, there is a 5% increase for the final 4 years of the program, but these fees will be paid for by the Lakeshore Compact, so our vocational, our college career tech compact. We have, it's essentially the same agreement as we had with them in the past.
I think they really like having our students over there. It's a nice compliment to everything else they do. Okay, are there any questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 25 is a resolution considering 5 of them, grant applications, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mr. Smith.
If I can detail these for you briefly. The first is an Ohio Department of Education Alternative Challenge Grant. A grant in the amount of $111,988 is being submitted through the Consolidated Continuous Improvement Plan to continue the funding to support our Saturday Academy and our Family Resource Manager. I might point out that some of the grant payments that you authorized this evening were made out of a grant that we got last year for this purpose. The second is the Ohio Department of Education ABLE Grant, the Adult Basic Literacy Education Grant, in the amount of $212,110 is being submitted through the Consolidated Continuous Improvement Plan by Monica Nagel, Director of the ABLE Program. These funds are used to support the local ABLE program that is operated throughout the district, through the district. The third is the Ohio Department of Education ABLE EL Civics Grant, English Language and Civics Grant. A grant in the amount of $19,000 is being submitted through the CCIP by Monica Nagel, Director of the ABLE program. These funds are used to support the EL Civics program portion of the ABLE program that is operated through the district. The fourth grant is a First-Ring Superintendent's Collaborative. It's a welcome mini grant in the amount of $1,650 has been submitted by John Schweitzer. If approved, these funds will be used to purchase materials and supplies for new student welcome packets for our secondary schools. And finally, First-Ring Superintendent's Collaborative Grant, a wellness mini grant in the amount of $2,100 has been submitted by George Ewell. If approved, these funds will be used to help support the purchase of flat-screen video monitors to be used to display the school menu along with nutritional messages. And those are the grants.
Okay. Which ones are any of these competitive grants?
Not really.
Okay.
Well, the ODE Alternative Challenge Grant is a competitive grant, but feels like it's not competitive because we're always awarded this grant.
As long as we maintain our,
Right.
uphold our end of the bargain, so to speak, and we have been, we pretty much are guaranteed those funds.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any questions or comments?
I mean, we see a lot of grant applications, but we don't really ever find out if we've received the grants until payment is made. Is there any way we can kind of get
Yes,
a
I'll
heads up?
report that.
I
One
often
example of one
wonder,
that we
I
just
go
did
back
not
and
get was,
think.
you remember that very exciting technology grant that
Mhm.
we applied for?
Yes.
The Flipping the Classroom and the Blended Learning Grant. We did not get that grant. We just learned that last
So
week.
disappointing.
Actually, no school districts in Cuyahoga County were awarded the grant. So,
Okay.
but
you have
we
to
will
try.
we'll get, on competitive grants, we will
Okay.
inform you.
That would be nice, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 26 is a resolution considering the approval of the Ohio High School Athletic Association membership for 2012-13, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mr. Smith.
This is a non-cost item, but we need to have a board resolution to show that we're participating in the Ohio High School Athletic Association
There are times when we pay dues, though.
for the LEO.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Are there any questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 27 is a resolution considering the authorization of our summer food service program, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sudar, second.
Second.
By Mrs. De Angelis.
We've been doing this now for several years, and it is fully funded by the Ohio Department of Education and allows the Euclid City Schools to serve breakfast and lunch each day throughout the summer at the following sites. This year will be Euclid Schools Child Development Center and Euclid High School, as well as La Parade Early Learning and Training Center, Imari House of Jubilee, and Our Lady of the Lake School. We have found this to be a popular program for the past several years, and we're very pleased to be able to get in touch with the community in this manner.
Dr. Jones, how are these locations decided upon? How do you determine the locations?
Well, I don't really know exactly how it's usually a collaborative effort with Mr. Ewell and other community agencies throughout the district.
Okay.
Because there are other places that provide meals, but we sort of negotiate where we would find the most access.
Or the most need. So that, yeah.
And is this, they have to be eligible for free and reduced lunches, or is that for anyone?
This is for
Any for
anyone.
students.
Anyone ages
Yes,
5 through
anyone.
18.
Right.
5 through 18. All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, item number 28 is a resolution considering the approval of additional student fees, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Smith, second.
Second.
By Mrs. De Angelis.
Yes, this requires some explanation. Back when we failed the levy in November, when the levy failed in November, among the $1.5 million in cuts was proposed a reduction of middle school sports for an estimated cost savings of approximately $100,000. That savings would have been in the savings of coaches' salaries and the benefits that are associated with them, as well as the athletic directors at those schools, the transportation and officiating fees and the like, that all that are associated with the middle school sports program. The board felt that it was not good to take that opportunity, and we didn't want to do that anyway, but we thought it was a very difficult opportunity, very difficult decision, I should say, to take those opportunities away from our middle school children. So in compromise, we proposed then that we increase the pay to participate fees in order to raise that additional $100,000. I have presented to the board this evening for your review an example of why this is important, and I will highlight the changes that we are making. The salaries and benefits for coaches are the first item on the delineation of the details here. Between the high school, Forest Park, and Central Middle School, with salaries and those benefits associated with them, the grand total of the salaries alone for coaches is $361,524. In addition to that, we have officials, we have security, we have uniforms, tournament fees, gate receipts, and the like. And that is the equivalent of, actually, with gate receipts, primarily because of the high school, it provides us, for the district, $6,332 to the good. So in transportation costs, this is for bus salaries, the diesel and the mileage is about $66,880. And for a grand total for a cost to the board of $422,075.93 for 1 year worth of athletic programming. I think it's money well spent. You know, we need opportunities for our children. Athletics teach great lessons to our students about preparation, about teamwork, about commitment, and it's also good for them physically to participate in athletics. But the offsetting costs, it's difficult to raise enough money to offset those costs entirely. But the total cost of the board with then we collected this year $57,725 as of the end of March 2012 in the first year of pay to participate fees. And that means the total net cost to the board is $364,350. We are projecting the pay increase, the pay to participate increase to be the following. If the board will remember, last year we had $75 for the first high school sport, $25 for each additional sport, and at the middle school, $50 for the first sport and $25 each additional sport, with a family cap of $250. The proposal is that we increase the first sport fee to $100 and the additional sport fee to $50 at the high school. Middle school, raising by $25 also to $75 for the first sport and $50 for each additional sport. And the high school, but then a per student cap of $150 at the high school and $125 at the middle school, meaning that a student can participate in 3 sports for the cost of 2. So this is the proposal. It's not something that I relish, but again, this is what we had to promise to the community, that would try to offset the costs of the athletic program. And we know how difficult it is to make this request, but I'm recommending approval this evening.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Just one quick question. Dr. Jones, what is our typical amount that we allocate to the athletic department? And, you know, what do we typically allocate to?
We have
from the budget, or general fund, I should say.
Steve, do you recall this? We also, by the way, we have LEL dues that we pay for, which is not on your list, of $4,000. Football equipment repair at $10,000, and so the allocation of money to the athletic department is small.
So we don't have like
outside of the supplemental duty contract expense.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we don't have like a line item in our budget that says, you know, this is the amount of money, say, Mr. Hardaway has to spend for the year, try to keep it at this amount?
We have made overtures to make him have to give him a line item of about $20,000.
Okay. That's it?
Mm-hmm.
How much does our boosters contribute annually? I know we're probably down in some revenue there, but I don't know how much they contribute to the sports program.
Steve, do we have figures on the boosters?
Let me ask another question while Mr. Hardaway is asking that. So, looking for that information. So I understand that the $250 family cap is gone, and
yes.
We're now going to have a student cap of $150 for a high school student, $125 for a middle school student?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, I did some research on some of the schools across the United States, particularly in Ohio, and they do, this is on average, they do, some schools will do a participation flat fee of about $100, between $100 and $150. Mm-hmm. So this actually might save money because there might be students who will only opt to do one sport.
Yes.
So this won't, I'm thinking that...
We'd actually discussed the option of a flat fee.
Yeah.
We felt it would be
I think this might be
costly.
I think this is a better option than the flat fee, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because in the long run, for a middle school student, if they had a flat fee of $100, they actually have a family savings of $25 because if they decide to only play one sport. Yeah. So,
Did you have our answer?
Yes, last year, the 10-11 school year was about $20,000.
I thought it was, yeah.
And then this year, it's less than that. It's probably about $15,000 this year.
Do the teams still raise some money on their own?
They do. They often have fundraisers for sports-specific equipment or uniform items.
You know, I do have to say, I'm almost against the increase to pay to participate fees, just in light of our middle school status, our Title I status at our middle schools. We just found out a month ago, thanks to Mr. Lysick and Mr. Schweitzer, that our middle schools are going to be designated Title I, meaning over 70%?
75%.
75% of those populations are at or below the poverty level or qualify for free or reduced lunches. But given our financial forecast, I understand the necessity of having to do something like this. But, you know, and I've had lengthy conversations with Dr. Jones for the last 2 weeks. And I think that what we need to do, instead of increasing fees in years to come, I would recommend that we look at creating alternative sources of revenue for our athletic department. And I just have a quick handout. I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier, but we had so much paperwork, I didn't want to overwhelm the board with so much. But if you could just, and these are all ideas that I've discussed with Dr. Jones, and I think Dr. Jones was going to pass some of this information along to you, Mr. Hardaway, and to Mr. Schweitzer, and to Dr. Smilek at the high school. But it's just some ideas that I came up with. There's 8 bullet points. And Mr. Hardaway, if you want a copy, I can pass this to you and maybe to Dr. Smilek in the back there also.
Oh, there's a lot of extra ones. Here you go.
But at the
One
top.
more copy too, by chance?
Do you have an extra copy?
Yes.
Okay.
Give that to Mr. Schweitzer if you would.
But at the top of the list, we tend to be a district that's very good at applying for grants. And there's quite a few grants to be had in terms of getting equipment, field repairs. I did a quick search about a week ago. It took me about an hour, but I found 4 grants that are in line with what we would be able to apply for these grants. It's a good sports equipment grant. There's the United States Tennis Association. They give out grants every year for tennis teams to provide equipment and repair to tennis courts. There's also this NFL grant. It's associated with LISC, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what LISC means, but they are typically geared towards communities with lower income students. And so they give favor to those candidates or grant proposals over other communities. And the last one is the Thomas R. Brown Athletic Grant, and that grant is given out every year. And I actually printed out a list of the 2012 recipients, and several states in the United States received grants. Ohio actually had 3 grants issued in 2012, and Riverside High School in Painesville Township was actually granted and Xenia High School. And the only reason why I mentioned that is because I now know where Xenia, Ohio is. Second would be just to solicit corporate sponsors, and I was just thinking of some banners. The other bulletin under solicit corporate sponsorship would be beverage contract with 8% of sales given back. The only reason why I bring this up is that I'm on the board for the Euclid Panthers swims team that's associated with the Recreation Department, and Max Stephen has just entered a contract with Coca-Cola products. And so now Coca-Cola products have to be sold at all city events or city-sponsored events. And then the Recreation Department actually gets a percentage of those sales that are going to go directly to programming.
We actually do that.
Do we do
In
that?
our
Yeah, we're
district,
Coca-Cola
and it's
first.
not dedicated
Okay.
towards sports, it's dedicated towards principal accounts.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure, but do the boosters participate in that also?
Absolutely.
Great. And then maybe do some renting of facilities, the stadium, the track. I mentioned this to Dr. Jones. We have a high school pool, and there are several high school swim teams that do not have pools in their high schools. They travel at very odd hours in the morning and in the evening to Cleveland State to practice or out to the new facility Inspire in Geneva. And I was wondering if we would be able to at least maybe contact one of these teams, Menor, Willoughby South, Lake Catholic, Benedictine. VASJ doesn't have a swim team, but maybe they would put together one if they had access to our pool and maybe charge a rental fee for them to have access to our facility. and just a few other things. I also thought maybe if we hosted additional events, maybe increase football games by 1 or 2, maybe host another youth wrestling tournament. I don't know if that would help it, maybe create some perks. And I talked to this about Dr. Jones. We can sell VIP parking passes to parents and visiting teams with the help of the junior ROTC. This VIP pass has been used in a high school in Maryland, and it's been very good. They've been able to get a few $1,000s worth of revenue every year that they go right back into the football program. So that would be something. And the other thing I was thinking when we were talking about the amount of money that we have to pay out in terms of salaries and benefits, maybe we should reevaluate how we pay our scorekeepers and statisticians if we do have paid scorekeepers and statisticians. The only reason I bring that up is because my children participate in swimming, and the swim parents don't get paid to run the scoreboard, run the scoring system, and we have 2 at the score table, 1 at the touch pads. We have 12 doing timing, 1 runner, and 1 backup timer. So we have a lot of parents who allow for this swim meet to happen, and of course, we have to have paid officials, but maybe the athletic boosters could provide parents to these positions or fill these positions, and these parents then could use those work hours to contribute to the participation hours for the Boosters Club. I don't know. I'm just so against raising fees in the next couple of years if we have to come to that again. I don't want to revisit this without maybe revisiting some of these ideas to generate revenue for our athletic department. The other idea that I had seen that seemed to be very good is create an online Euclid sports store with a local company. There was a school in California that did this. They negotiated a contract with a local company. They agreed to a percentage of the sales, and it really helped with the athletic department because then they didn't have to maintain a large inventory at their store. It was popular with students because then they can customize their spirit wear, and then they ended up expanding the online for purchasing of game tickets and the VIP parking passes. So. And then just to boost concession sales, I know that that's where the boosters make the majority of their money. If this high school in Maryland negotiated an agreed percentage of sales with local companies to sell items that didn't compete with the boosters' concession items. And so they added stuff like pasta bowls. I thought pierogies with sour cream. We can, culinars could come over and do that, or fun desserts like Italian ice and cannoli, because they found that a lot of families were coming right after work and not eating, and that the adults preferred something like this that didn't compete, but then the boosters can negotiate a percentage of those sales so that they could, get an additional, So those are just 8 ideas, but I would love, Mr. Hardaway, to sit down with you. I write grants for a living. I've only been doing it for 5 years, and I've only had 1 successful grant actually funded. But my husband writes grants. He's been doing that for over 25 years, and he's absolutely willing to look through these and help with that whole writing process because these are competitive grants. But he would be, and anything that I can do to help.
Sounds like you need to become a member of the Boosters Board. I think they may have a position for you.
What, Mrs. Stewart, we work all those hours in swimming, and I never am able to get to the concession stands, but maybe once or twice a year. That's it. That's all I'm able to do. But I think that with this sort of, if we could maybe expand some of these things and really reach out and work with our boosters in a different way, we might be able to help preserve our athletic program.
But in support of our boosters, though, we have an outstanding group of people who are our sports boosters, and the amount of time and energy and the passion they have for our kids in sports, I can't speak higher.
That's why I would recommend them. They would be the only group that I would recommend.
Do we pay scorekeepers and statisticians?
We do.
We do?
Maybe not the statisticians, but the scorekeepers.
I don't know the names of all the positions, so I just.
And for what sports do we pay?
Steve, do you have your information offhand? Who are our scorekeepers we pay?
By sport?
Who? Just who?
Well, which sports?
Not the people.
Sports.
What sports?
Sports.
Football, basketball,
volleyball, wrestling,
soccer. Every sport that there is a book for.
Except Swimming.
The only sport would be, sports would be tennis, that there's the coaches, they have flip cards to keep their own score, and pretty much the student athletes keep their scores themselves. But other than that,
You don't pay Matt Sweet for the swimming.
only officials for swimming,
Right.
because the parents take
Care
care
of
of that.
that.
Like you said, with his parents of swimming, they are, I think, most dedicated parents out of all the sports, because they're there and always there. The other sports, the number of parents attending or available to help out is very limited. And the same thing that happens with the boosters. They are a small, hard-working group of parents, but their numbers are small. They're the same 6 or 7 that do it all. And they work hard to increase their memberships. And it was rewarding to see that you've also researched a lot of these, in which I've done in the past, giving the coaches and boosters, and I can sit down and
I would love to.
kind of mix ideas in regards to generating revenue for athletics. So it's just an ongoing struggle, but I continue to be creative to try to bring more revenue for our student athletes and coaches. And they have stepped it up this year in regards to their fundraising efforts and trying to offset the pay to participate fees, as well as revenue for uniforms and or accessories for sports.
Well, and I had to step in and help assistant coach for the Forest Park Middle School fast pitch team. Miss Jenkins had to take maternity leave and have a baby. And I will tell you, just the excitement that those kids generate for me, I don't ever want to take those opportunities away from them. They're just so excited. And it's a wonderful program that we have here in Euclid, because a lot of these kids don't have the ability to participate until they get to the middle school and high school level. And anything that we can do to maintain those programs for them, I'm just such an advocate. I know, obviously, you can tell, but I understand the importance, being a female and having 3 daughters, how important it is for girls in the middle school age to be able to have the opportunity to participate in something outside of the classroom.
Well, we definitely have to keep middle schoolers busy after school.
Oh, yeah.
So we know that's a big, thank you for bringing all of this to our attention and to giving it to Dr. Jones and Mr. Hardaway. I'm sure that, I think we do some of the, we do the banners, we must charge them for the football stadium. But maybe we can,
I was just thinking,
maybe we can market more, and see if we can't get more colleges or somebody to.
Well, our baseball fields, I was thinking in particular, just because Boys League has this travel team that plays at the Forest Park field, the baseball field there, and it doesn't have any banners except for one, Legends Photography. Is there more than one now?
Well, at least there are at least 3 or 4 up there, I think.
Oh, is there?
We have Cleveland Clinic. We also have a couple universities. We have HTM Marketing that they do various programs like Circle K. I'm trying to think. I think Bill Mason also markets with us, as well as there's one more, All-American Publishing, that does our sports schedules and they solicit advertisement. So we get revenue back from that. It's minimal, but it's still revenue.
Okay, thank you very much. Did we vote on that one?
Did not vote.
Okay. All right, any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Van Ho.
Yes.
Mrs. DeAngelis.
Yes.
Mrs. Lysy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sudar.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. I have a few remarks for the superintendent's informal, if you don't mind. The first is an information to the board. And on May 5th and May 12th, Hundreds of community members, staff and students took the opportunity to tour our new elementary schools, and though they're not finished, about 200 visited Chardon Hills and another 200 Arbor on the 5th, nearly 500 in all if you counted the children who accompanied but didn't sign in. This past Saturday, nearly 100 visited Shoreview and about 75 toured Bluestone. So it was a nice turnout at all 4 buildings. Many asked about tours when the buildings, tours of the buildings once they are finished, and I assured them that we will proudly open the doors when we celebrate their total online arrival in September. I want to thank Mr. Higley for helping to coordinate and arrange the tours along with PCS representatives and members of the architectural firms, and as well as Mr. Hummel for guiding several tours as well. I'd also like to thank members of my cabinet who were on site ready to pitch in with tours. Mr. Bassick, Ms. Allen, Dr. Selico, and Mr. Lysick all were able to make it. If I missed someone, I apologize. We did have board members on site. I know that we had Mrs. Van Ho, Mrs. Sudar, and Mrs. DeAngelis, and I know that if they had been able to attend, Mrs. Lysy and Mr. Smith would have been there as well. It was a very proud moment for the district. So I also want to thank members of the greater community and the learning community who were there to examine our buildings and get the sort of the buzz about what's going on. Second announcement is that school is winding down. I'd like to remind the parents and students and the community that we started the school year 1 week early this year, and we'll end it 1 week early as well as a result. The last day for students is May 30th, and the last day for staff is May 31st. Prom is this Saturday at La Malfa, beginning at 6:30, and Party Center in Menor. In commencement, mark your calendars for Thursday, May 29th at the Wolstein Center at Cleveland State. Again,
It's Tuesday.
Tuesday, I'm not Thursday. I can't even read my own writing. Tuesday, May 29th at the Wolstein Center in Cleveland State University. And this will be a great opportunity for us. We love this celebration every year. It's enthralling, I believe. Looking forward to that. Board, I'll be communicating with you through mailers about meeting times if you want to ride with me downtown. And that ends my informal.
Okay, thank you. Are there any communications or petitions?
There are not.
Any new or old business? Any board members informal?
Last Thursday night, we had a very wonderful evening at Euclid High School, which was our senior awards. And one of the counselors informed us that the senior class has brought in over $3 million in scholarships, which I think is really impressive. We've got just an unbelievable number of outstanding kids at Euclid High School, and they're ready to move on and continuing their education with the help of scholarship money is a great thing. So it was a good evening.
It's always an exciting event. It really is. I wish I'd remembered to reflect on that myself in my informal comments, but to see those young men and women proudly coming on stage and receiving awards and recognition, it was really...
And $3 million is significant.
Any other board members informal?
I'll just add that I had an opportunity to talk with a parent today who had gone to the school tours. Very well received, Dr. Jones. You're absolutely right. It's just a good shot in the arm for our community, and it's generating a lot of excitement. It should be the start of a really good school year next year.
Right. It's a very exciting time.
I did enjoy hearing the people's comments and how surprised they were at some of the features that we have in the buildings, and very impressed with how things look, the foyers and the media centers and all the natural light, which is terrific.
Right. The windows
it's just
are
unbelievable how much natural light there is. And one of the architects I was talking with said, you know, we all went through the time, those of us old enough, remember the times in the 70s when they went away from having windows in buildings because of the energy crisis and so forth that we went through. Well, they now have perfected the windows so much more that we can have large windows and still remain energy efficient, and it's just incredible what difference those windows make. It's wonderful to see, and we got a lot of positive, very positive comments on that. We also had the student Achievement Award Banquet, along with the induction into the Distinguished Hall of Fame recipients, and that was also another wonderful night. And, you know, people say, well, you know, where do the kids go if they go to Euclid? Well, we found out that they can go just about anywhere they want to if they work hard. And Brown is one of those schools that was mentioned. And, you know, then we also had some other prominent schools. And so I think that people who wonder, you know, what we're doing, it really shows when you go to events like that. And so please don't listen to the naysayers, because they're always going to be out there. There are a lot of wonderful things going on and very talented students in our district. Hey, are there any visitor comments? Yes, sir. You please come to the microphone, state your name, address. You need to be a resident of the city. Okay.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Dave Rojak. I live at 354 Halley Drive, 2 blocks away from Upson. My history with Upson and Euclid, we've lived here since the 40s. I went to Upson Forest Park in Euclid. I was even captain of the guards of the Upson Safety Patrol in 6th grade. By a stroke of fate, my nephew, 18 years later, was also named captain of the guards at Upson. I spent many wonderful summers at the supervised playground at Upson in the 1970s. And I have lived in the Upson neighborhood in all or parts of 44 of my 47 years. The reason I'm coming back tonight, I wasn't going to come back here. If you may recall, I came at I think it was the December board meeting. And I'm not even concerned about working on the almost finished job that I first inquired about well before construction began. But some Euclid graduates and other current citizens of Euclid suggested that I should come back here, telling me that I'm certainly not alone in my way of thinking. Also, I always believed my former teachers at Upson, like Mrs. Morgan, Mrs. Kluchin, Mrs. Snyder, Mrs. Fowler, who lived right across the street from Upson and had beautiful roses, although thorny. Miss Baxter, Miss Begita, Mr. Fiskus, Mr. Smerdell, Mr. Waldron, Mr. Hammerbeck, Mr. Hudak, Mrs. Klein, Mrs. Dittmar, Mrs. Sukol, the principal, and many others, when they told us that if at first we don't succeed, try again. In that spirit, permit me to take the rest of these 2 pages, just 2 pages, to review the situation to date. I originally volunteered to pass out campaign literature in the Upson neighborhood when the building of the 4 new schools was coming up for a vote. Campaign literature said that if the citizens of Euclid vote for the construction of the 4 new elementary schools, then more citizens of Euclid will be hired to work on the construction project. In retrospect, I wonder if this was really meant to say that if you lived in Euclid and happened to be a member of the specific union hall, then maybe you would have the opportunity to work on a job. I went through all the proper channels with regard to sending in my application over 2 years ago and was given the delay game for a long time. The first construction manager finally got back to me and said he was pondering how I could be of assistance with the project. Something happened and there became a new construction manager, and I don't know how. I again went through the process with the new construction manager of submitting my application. Again, there was a significant delay after repeated attempts at contacting him. Finally, I was told that I had no chance of working on the project, that all labor opportunities had been fulfilled. That's when I went to the board meeting in December. I think it was December. I went because when I came across the school board meeting on local cable TV a few weeks earlier, the construction company was being questioned by board members as to why they didn't have more Euclid citizens working on the project. So I figured I should go to the next board meeting and present my case. When I explained to the board about my situation, Superintendent Jones was kind enough to request that I call him the following week. When I did, he said he would talk to the construction manager and have him call me. About a week later, the new construction manager did call me to give me a deeper explanation about why someone from the Upson neighborhood had absolutely no chance of working on the construction of the new school. He told me that in order to be considered for the job, I would have to have done a 3-year apprenticeship first, which effectively shut out anybody from the neighborhood working on the school, because the building campaign and the referendum all came about in less than 3 years anyway. If we were to take a poll of the good citizens of Euclid and ask them if the building of their neighborhood schools could have as many Euclid people involved as possible, my guess is that the overwhelming amount would say yes. After all, that was pretty much what the campaign literature had led people to believe. Besides that, the city of Euclid would garner more local income taxes for hiring Euclid people to do the job. But I would say that most importantly, having local people build their local schools would have brought a much greater sense of goodwill, loyalty, neighborhood belonging, and awareness that would have been of benefit to these neighborhoods for generations to come. The decisions made to exclude Euclid people from building Euclid schools flies in the face of current and historical thought on school and community relations. Indeed, since schools and churches, they're absolute pillars of the communities, have first been constructed anywhere, it has been the local people of the town who have built these sacred community structures. Until now. If we were to ask eminent educational and sociological scholars like Coleman or Sir Giovanni, whose works dealt greatly on the concepts of schools and community, my guess is that they would absolutely agree that if a local school can be built by local people, then by all means it should, as a best practice of school and community relations. Schools are not simply factories or office buildings, where tenants come and go for the sake of profiting from their products and services. Most often, business tenants at office buildings can go up and leave for another town simply seeking a more affordable lease for their business or for greener pastures. The construction of these new schools, from the viewpoint of the school board and the construction company, seems to have been based on the factory and not the humane model where those forming the building plans take no consideration whatsoever into both building the school and building the community, brick by brick and heart by heart. Schools don't simply up and leave like businesses. They are entrenched structures of learning and community set on foundations that do not just up and leave. The old Upson has served neighborhood families for roughly 100 years. Surely Shoreview Elementary will be meant to last even longer. I ask you, what would have been the greatest amount of goodwill done by the Euclid schools for Euclid families in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of constructing a local school? Especially in that, if it wasn't for the citizens of Euclid voting for the referendum, there wouldn't be any new schools. And off my paper, I would just like to say that if a Euclid construction task force would have been put together, you would have saved millions of dollars. Once the schools are built, the current laborers who laid the bricks from places outside Euclid will take little concern about the education taking place here in Euclid. On the other hand, if you had hired as many local people as possible to build the local schools, you'd have had an outpouring of goodwill, social capital, protection in the neighborhood, safety in the neighborhood, and community loyalty of an immeasurable and priceless value. It's simply the natural, logical, and practical way that schools have been built since the very beginning of organized education, everywhere, until now. You can say that the new school will have special programs to make it more community-oriented, but you have only had one chance to build this side by side with the community of Euclid together, rather than building it apart from the community and then dictating to them how you plan on building community once the project is complete. Euclid schools have been important to my family, and still are. My two sisters work for the school district. My father was a teacher and a coach in the school district. My father said that I should never criticize without at least having a solution to offer. With that being said, I wonder about the upcoming deconstruction of Upson. Are you actually going to have people who have no emotional ties with Upson take down the blackboards? Will it actually take a 3-year apprenticeship to take down the bulletin boards and to deconstruct other miscellaneous items? I had heard that the Upson staff will be involved in its deconstruction. I know that if you let it be known, by Facebook or otherwise, that those who went to Upson will have the chance to put the grand old school out to pasture, a number of them would surely oblige, either voluntarily or at a much more affordable rate than what the laborers are receiving now, because it's not about the money. It would, in its own way, provide the appropriate closure to a school that meant so much to so many for so long. In the end, I only wish goodwill for the Euclid School District and its students. I'm simply saying that the goodwill would have become much easier to come by if it wasn't such an outlandish idea that a homegrown product of Euclid and Upson be given the opportunity to help and serve on the construction of the new school. Even more so because having Euclid people work on the new school's project was one of the linchpins of selling the project to the community. That's all I have. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Rochak. I know that you're familiar with the project labor agreement that we had with the unions. We have continually asked the construction managers about Euclid people working because that was the board's intent, that we get as many Euclid people. The information that we've received is that all the Euclid people are working, they just might not all be working here in the city of Euclid because they may be assigned to other projects, but that the members of the unions that are Euclideans are at work.
What percentage of people from Euclid are on the Four New Schools project? Of all the workers involved, how many would you say, what percent?
But what I'm saying is they're saying that those people might not be working here, but they are working. And so they can't take them off of those jobs to have them
But
come.
they're not involved in the Euclid jobs anyway.
Right, but they're members of the union that are building our buildings.
But
and so I'm not going to argue with you on this point.
When this all came about, I would think, like, you know, whether a union is involved, this is not a right-to-work state, but okay, construction manager, we would like, you know, a certain percentage for sure of the positions, even if it's menial labor. I mean, I'm not an architect, you know, but I could do smaller tasks. And we would like 20 positions at each school saved for Euclid residents. When we're talking about saving money, the best way to build community is to do it authentically through helping the people of the citizens of Euclid.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rochak.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other visitor comments? Okay, the board will be moving into executive session for the purpose of a student hearing. The only action that will be taken will be directly related to that student hearing. We will take no other action on business this evening. So you will be able to leave and know that we're not taking any other action. And at this time, I'll take a motion from the board to go into executive session.
I would move that the board go into executive session for the purpose of a student hearing.
Thank you. Moved by Mr. Smith.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Vidar. Thank you.